This is Jim Slightom, and this is a 1-hour CEC, continuing education credit for troubleshooting, virtual electronic troubleshooting. And as you can see, there's my email address. If you'd like to write me, please feel free to do so with any questions that you might have. I'd be happy to answer your questions. And let's get started here. I'm going to stop the recording. Okay, I guess should give you another second to write down my email address, and then we'll get started here. Okay. So, I want you to know, first of all, before I get started, I'd like to thank the National Academy of Optometry who's sponsoring this presentation, and it should be on their website. And that's where you're watching this, is on the website. And I am a full-time consultant with ABB Optical Group. And some of the slides that I've been provided are compliments of Patrick Caroline, Randy Kojima, and Craig Norman. When I come on those slides, I'll try my best to recognize them for sharing these slides with me. I do have permission to do that. And here we go. Let's get started. So what designs are available for fitting irregular corneas? Unlike what it used to be, which was about the only thing you had to fit was a corneal lens in PMMA material. They tried scleral lenses in PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, and since there's no oxygen that transmits through the lens itself, the eye would become, it would become in trouble. It basically would develop edema almost immediately and swell up, and you had to remove the lens and couldn't wear it. So they discovered one day that you didn't have to fit the entire eye. You could just fit the portion of the cornea. And when they discovered you could fit a portion of the cornea, then they were able to make all kinds of designs out of PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, before the other materials came along. And thus contact lens fitting was born. Okay. So now we have what we call high decay materials, which lets tremendous amounts of oxygen through the lens. So that PMMA is 0, we have lenses that have numbers above 100 now that will allow us to fit scleral lenses successfully, where we couldn't fit them successfully before. And we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk about other lenses. So with a decay of over 100 versus a PMMA lens that had 0, higher oxygen goes to these compromised corneas and allows us to fit many different types of designs very successfully. GP lenses can now be manufactured in 20 millimeters or bigger in diameter. That's huge. Most soft lenses average around 14 millimeters, so you can see how big that lens becomes at 20 millimeters. Okay. The disadvantages of high decay lenses is it's high silicone content, so sometimes you have wetting issues that you have to contend with. Okay. They're softer with that silicone content, so they scratch easier. They wear out sooner. They warp easier. Okay. And not only do they warp and wear out sooner, they get more deposits on them. So cleaning systems and care systems, the proper ones, are very, very important. You need to use the proper ones for these type of materials. So proper care systems are just as important as the material that's being used. And you need to check with your local laboratory that manufactures the lenses to find out what is the best possible care system for the type of lens and type of material that's being used. Okay. So when correcting aberrations, and we talk about this all the time in glasses now, they make aberration controlling ophthalmic lenses eyewear. And but in contact lenses, you'll discover that most of the aberrations are taken care of as long as you have a proper fit, as long as that lens fits properly. Just by putting a GP lens on the surface of the eye, you will take care of some 80% of the aberrations that are caused or created by an irregular cornea. Pretty interesting, huh? So Z-axis tilt is the killer, and this is what corneal lenses on an irregular cornea quite often, this is something that quite often occurs. If you remember the X and Y axis that you have, which is the horizontal and vertical, think of graph paper, where you used to graph things on the paper and you had these little squares. That is the X and Y axis as you run horizontally and vertically up and down this page that has the marks on it. But that's two-dimensional. The third dimension coming at you and going away from you is the z-axis. So there's the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. And z-axis tilt, meaning that lens is tilted towards you or away from you, can cause some real problems with irregular corneas. And the reason being is you get all this uneven tear behind the lens, so you induce aberrations and high cylinders. So if a lens is tipped or tilted on the cornea, you're going to get some unwanted cylinder findings over the lens. Probably you're going to find that when you over refract. You're also probably going to find that the quality of vision has gone down because of the aberrations it's created, and so contrast sensitivity is lowered also in this lens. A tilted lens can cause a distorted or fluctuating vision. So the steeper secondary curve was invented for post-LASIK fits at first, and actually it was post-RK fits that they invented it for first, refractive surgery, because the cornea has been made flatter centrally and steeper in the mid-periphery, so we made contact lenses to match that. But what we discovered in orthokeratology and what we discovered in just traditional lens fitting is that that secondary curve being steeper than the base curve also helps prevent z-axis tilt and holds that lens more centrally. And so it's being used more and more in many different designs, scleral designs included, but also in corneal designs we use it quite often to stabilize a lens. So as long as the lens, and this is a Patrick Caroline slide, as long as the lens on the surface of the cornea is not tilted, if it's straight up and down like it's supposed to be and well centered, you're going to get tear factor that falls goes behind the back surface of the lens, between the back surface and the corneal surface, and that's going to fill in, and it has a refractive ability just like the plastic does. So it corrects a lot of these aberrations and a lot of the irregular cylinder that you find that's caused by this very irregularly shaped cornea. So that lacrimal lens, it has just as much of a refractive building as the plastic. Okay, so now you take these fabulous K readings, and a fabulous K reading is going to have a plot point here and a plot point there horizontally, a plot point here and a plot point there vertically. And what that ends up being is a very small portion of the cornea, probably a little less than the pupil size. And so you've left out a whole lot of information, and you'll order up a contact lens to be fitted on this eye that looks perfectly spherical and fine, and you'll discover that down here where this hot zone is, this red and yellow area where the eye is steeper, you have a beginning keratoconus, and probably that lens you ordered is not going to fit because you didn't take that into consideration and design the lens to fit that. Of course, you could fit it with a scleral lens and vault all that, and we'll talk about that also. So you've got these very irregular corneas out there, all these irregular corneal shapes. How are you going to fit this eye on the left here? Looks like a post-refractive surgery that has some ectasia, some inferior steepening here, and it needs a reverse curve to match up with the steeper area here. Over here you've got a probably pellucid marginal degeneration, seeing the two kissing bird heads. When you see those two kissing bird heads that are in the red here, looks like their beaks are coming together. You have this very steep area inferiorly. You have this very flat area superiorly. So now you may have 10, 12, even 15 or 20 diopters difference in steepness and flatness. So if you fit a optical zone that's spherical, and this is about an 8mm picture, if you fit an 8mm optical zone, somewhere it's going to probably be too steep and somewhere it's probably going to be too flat when you put it on this eye. So you have to know exactly how to design that corneal lens to make it work. Okay, so this is background information that's leading up to the true part of the lecture, which the true part of the lecture is sharing this information electronically and working with others, whether it be a consultant in a laboratory or a fitting person that you know that's a very wise, well-educated fitter that you'd like to share the information with. You can do this electronically nowadays, and this is what we're leading up to, but I'm giving you some background information here before we get to that part. So spherical lenses can correct a tremendous amount of irregularity and astigmatism as long as they're not tilted on the cornea, but they can only impact the the irregularities that are on the cornea. So if it's the crystalline lens inside the eye, then you're going to have to do something on the front surface of that gas perm or a soft lens that's toric to correct the irregularities that are inside the eye, especially in the crystalline lens, which is the most common. Okay, can induce significant amount of astigmatism and aberration if they're tilted, which I've already discussed. Okay, so this is another Patrick Caroline picture showing a photokeratoscopic picture here of a very irregular cornea. You can see those rings are all distorted, and some of them jammed together and some of them further apart. And so you put this spherical lens on there, that tear layer fills in behind, the front surface of the lens becomes the front surface of the eye, and lo and behold, look right over the optical axis, right over the pupil. You have all this correction going on just in a sphere by not doing anything except getting a well-fitted lens in a spherical design. Okay, so now what if we just decided we're just going to vault all those problems and not try to fit them in a corneal lens because it's so steep and so flat? Maybe we just go all the way past the limbus, let the tear factor fill in, and it takes care of all of our problems as far as fitting is concerned. And it can. And it can. Finding the proper fit in a scleral lens sometimes is a challenge, but once you have that lens fit, it's a wonderful tool to allow the patient to see with and also be very comfortable in. As you can see up here, we've got about a 15.5 millimeter lens, and we've got about a 9.5 millimeter lens, and look at the difference in size. So this thing is huge. It also has more of a bowl on it. Let's keep going here. More of a bowl where you can see it's vaulted away from the surface more than the 9 millimeter lens is, just due to its size and its design. Okay, so now you're going to fit these irregular corneas, and now your goal is to vault all of it rather than fit it. So you just want to get past it and make sure that it fits. And by past it, I mean this is fluorescing tear behind the lens. You want to go all the way past the limbus with fluorescein and just vault all the irregularities. So this is a scleral lens on a very irregular eye, and this is what you're shooting for. Okay, so as you can see in the white light, you can see that you have fluorescein going all the way past the limbus, and you do want it to vault past the limbus. You do not want it to seal off at the limbus, because if it seals off at the limbus, the limbal vessels control epithelial cell production, and you're going to mess up the epithelium on the surface of the cornea, and you certainly do not want to do that, because that's the protective surface of the cornea, protects it from all kinds of problems. So basically, and the epithelium on most eyes will replace itself about every 72 hours. New cells come and old cells slough off, so you want to be able to have that production unencumbered. Okay, so you can see, as this shows here, again, this is a Patrick Caroline and Randy Kojima slide. You can see that you have vaulted all the way past the limbus, where that innermost ring is showing you the limbal. That's showing the outskirts of the limbus there. Okay, the very outer limits of the limbus. Okay, so ideal scleral landing. What you would like to do in the sclera, you try to get the periphery of this lens designed so that it doesn't seal off the blood vessels, because the blood vessels have to feed into this limbus. They have to keep it alive, and you can see that these are unencumbered. They're going into the surface, behind the surface of the lens, and they're not being distorted, or sometimes they're sealed off, and there's no seal off here. So that's what you're looking for in a proper fit. So you want to make sure that that edge is made just right so it doesn't encumber things. And again, you can see here that you have a pretty good fit. There's some unencumbered vessels here. You might say, oh, well, that's maybe a little encumbered, but you see no redness, no real seal off. That's a pretty good fit. This one is sent to me from a cell phone. This one was sent from a very high resolution camera that's hooked to a slit lamp. So you're getting a much bigger, more detailed picture here. You're getting a lesser picture, but yet you get the same idea, even from a cell phone, just taking a picture through a slit lamp. Okay. So unencumbered vessels is what you're looking for, and you can see that these are unencumbered. But you also can seal it off, and then when you seal it off, that eye starts to turn red. They start to get extra vessel production just at the edge of the lens, and the eye turns red, and you've sealed off the blood, and the blood starts to accumulate there, and that's an issue. You need to let that blood flow all the way into the limbus. Okay, so basically what you have here is a great fit up here on the left-hand side. This little bit of darkness is because almost all lenses decenter downward a little bit here because of their weight, and also because the scleral shape is different superiorly and inferiorly. So this lens wants to position down. So what you would like to do to make sure that there isn't getting some seal off at the limbus here, have the patient gaze downward, and if that fills in with fluorescein, that's just an artifact. That's really, there is tear back there, but it's just an artifact. Now here you're showing central touch. You can see that little area of touch. You want to get rid of that. You want it to be completely vaulted. That will cause a problem and some desiccation probably in the long run on that cornea. Over here, you don't have enough vault. You put your fluorescein in, and you can see all the you can see the pupil margin, you can see the pupil, you can see all the outline of the iris. You really want this mostly to disappear like it is in the upper left-hand corner. That is, you're looking for somewhere between probably 200 and 300 microns of vault. So 200 and 300 microns of tear should be back there. You're probably approaching 20 microns of tear here, and that's way too little. Okay, so what you have here is a way to check to see if you have enough central vault. And what they've done is they've done a parallelepiped with basically the slit lamp, and they put it at a 45-degree angle, and they shine this light into the eye with a slit, and they see, okay, this is our tear volume right here behind the lens, and you'll see a little bit of tear on the front surface of the lens. That fluorescein right there is the front surface of the lens that you're seeing glowing there, so there's some fluorescein on there. But when you shine that blue light in there, you can also see the thickness of the lens, and you're trying to match approximately the thickness of the lens with the thickness of the tear, because in this case it's 300 microns thick on the lens. Again, a Patrick Caroline and Randy Kojima slide. Over here you can see once the fluorescein has dissipated off the front surface, it's mostly disappeared, but you can still see just a hint of fluorescein there where you can see what the thickness of the lens is, and it's a pretty darn close match to the thickness of the tear. And that's what you're shooting for, in that 300 micron, 200 micron range of fluorescing tear. And this is after the lens has settled on the eye for several hours or even for several days. This is what you're looking for. Okay. So you have a vaulted lens, but it's not a completely centered lens. As you'll see here, from the iris out to the edge is less distance than it is from the iris out to the edge here. It's pretty common that the lens not only decenters inferiorly, but it decenters laterally some too, because the scleral area is different on the nasal side versus the temporal side. So this is what you end up with in a slightly decentered lens. So what you probably would like to do is put some toric peripheral curves on there so that you can get steeper and flatter areas on the lens. And if you want that lens to center up better, basically you'll need to know where that toric, the flatness and the steepness of the lens ends up. You put it on the eye, it's marked at the 180, but it may end up more like this, and you discover, okay, where I need to flatten it, where I need to steepen it, now I know. Not only that, you can do a toric front surface on this lens for cylinder. If you have some residual cylinder, that lens is going to orient itself exactly where it needs to, where it's flat and where it's steep. So it is flat. It's showing you that it's flat in these two meridians. This is where it is has gone, because the flattest part of the lens, which started at 180 across the horizontal, now has located itself across a little more oblique here. And you would report that somewhere between 1 and 2 o'clock on that one dot superiorly. And that way we know exactly how many degrees it has gone off of 0. And we will be able to manufacture a lens that you like. And we'd also like to give you a toric front surface in power, because we can do that. When you tell us exactly where that lens orients itself, we can build cylinder on the front surface to take care of any remaining residual astigmatism. Okay. So we have smaller lenses. This lens back here was a 16.5 millimeter lens that I showed you. You can put a 14.5 millimeter lens on. You would need it for smaller corneas, smaller fissures. Maybe the patient has ptosis. Okay, handling issues. They can't handle that big lens, so they never can quite get it on and make it work. So that's a good idea. Something else that learned at the global meeting is that also the further out on the sclera you go, the more irregular it is, or the more toric it is. And that usually happens after 15 millimeters. So if you have a very toric or a very irregular sclera, that when you're trying to fit these bigger lenses, you may want to go smaller and avoid that. And so you can make your peripheral curve system spherical, which is simpler, and you can fit that lens easier if it's under 15 millimeters. Okay, so sometimes you have tissue that builds up, whether it be a pterygium or just some form of tissue that's that's building up onto the sclera. And what happens is you don't want to rub that area, you don't want to impinge that area, you don't want more vessels to grow in that area causing problems. So what you can do is you can notch the lens. They can see on the right hand side over here that we have a notch. So you put this fitting lens on and you see where it's touching. And these are two different eyes, of course, once the tissue is showing in two different places. But you can see that you could notch that lens exactly where you needed it notched, and make it stay in that one position so that it doesn't encumber or press on that extra tissue that's built up on the sclera. Okay, most bubbles are insertion bubbles. It could be the lens is too flat, or it could be the lens is too steep or tilted on the cornea, but most of the bubbles are caused by insertion. You didn't get enough fluid in there, so therefore it's showing you a bubble. This one is maybe a little flat. It does show some touch area inferiorly here, but probably if you filled that bowl back up with solution, that bubble would go away. Okay. It's another tool in the toolbox. A fitting set is necessary. You can't hardly fit this lens without a fitting set. More follow-up visits are needed. So you're going to have to follow this patient carefully. You don't want it sealing off in the sclera. Things change over time, so you're going to have them back and make sure that everything is working well and that you haven't sealed the blood vessels off into the sclera. And it's somewhat of a little steep learning curve, the curve, how to fix it and the whys. And you can always use the manufacturer, the person who's manufacturing the lens, with consultation and figure it out a little quicker with some help. Okay. Reasons why sclera lenses are not an option: maybe the patient can't handle it. Maybe they just can't handle that huge lens. Maybe the cost is too great. You better be charging more for sclera lens fits. They're more time consuming, and they're also very specialized, and there's no reason not to charge more. And maybe it's too great a cost for the patient. Maybe they just can't afford it. Their insurance won't pay for it, and they don't have the money. Has worn corneal GP lenses with great success in the past, so why are you switching them? They're happy with their corneal lenses. Why are you putting them in a sclera lens? I'm always curious as to why people do that. Oh, I fit everyone in sclera lenses. Really? Really? Why would you do that? Okay. And some people just failed in sclera lenses for one reason or another. They just never could find a fit. They never could be comfortable. You know, there's all kinds of reasons that you don't keep them in a sclera lens. Okay. Soft lenses are now being designed for irregular corneas. So there are many of them out there, and one of them, a couple of them we're going to talk about. Soft lenses for irregular corneas. Many are just intolerant to the other lenses. They just can't wear them, and you can make them see pretty good. Not quite as good as with a gas perm, but you certainly can make them productive in society, and you certainly can make them pass their driver's test a lot of times with a soft lens. And they just want a soft lens. They do not want a rigid lens. They've maybe tried them in the past and had a bad experience, so they're ready for a soft lens. This is one that's made by Alden Optical called a Novacone. There are several versions of this out here. I just happen to have pictures of this one. We have a concise cone that works very similar to this with the company I work for. Novacone is made by Alden Optical. And basically what they do is they make a super thick center in this lens to take care of the irregularities. And they actually make a fitting curve that's the second curve in the lens. It's closer to the periphery here. It's in the mid-periphery of the lens. that is actually what holds that lens in position and really creates the fit. And most of the really thick lenses have this feature where they actually use a fitting curve beyond the base curve. The base curve is, some of them only have 1 or 2 base curves. They don't have a multiple base curve selection. Now the NovaCone gives you many, many base curve selections that you can choose from, but there are some that change that secondary curve more, and that's how they control the fit, more with the secondary curve than they do with the base curve of the lens. Okay. What makes a NovaCone work? It's thicker, so it allows, actually will allow tear factor behind the lens too, and it neutralizes the irregularity through the thickness of the lens itself, and it's unique in design, they say. And the other thing that they can do at Alden is they can make you the dual axis, dual elliptical stabilization, where they actually make thick thin zones, where they make the periphery of the lens that is thicker at 3 and 9 o'clock and thinner at 12 and 6, and that way with their toric lenses they can make them very stable. Okay, it's a 4-step process from inside and out, and in their fitting process, first you want to determine the base curve, the central base curve that you want. You want to determine how thick are you going to make this lens. The more irregularity you have, the thicker you're going to make it. The less irregularity you have, the lesser thickness you're going to have. Okay. Then you determine the lens power after you try a lens on from the trial set. Then you over refract it and determine the power. And then the fitting curve is the paracentral curve, like I was talking about, and that's what's going to cause the lens to fit or not fit more than the base curve even. The base curve in many cases is inconsequential as compared to the paracentral curve. Okay, so you're going to put some high molecular fluorescein because it will be absorbed into the soft lens material that they make, so you can check the fit. And the ideal fit, they say in this case on a particular patient that had keratoconus, is the central fit. And if it looks like it's got a little touch, that just means it's 20 microns of or less of fluorescing tear. The human eye can only see about 20 microns of fluorescing tear. So that's not really touching the cornea, but it is approaching the cornea. It's becoming closer to the cornea. Over here, you've lost a lot of the fluorescein in the outer periphery, as you can see, and this is even a darker area. Over here, you've got a lot more vault, but you almost have too much vault, and you actually will lose vision if it's too much vault. So you want, again, the thickness of the tear layer to be about the same as the thickness of the lens in an ideal situation. It won't always be, because sometimes you have to make it thicker and thicker to make it work on these very irregular corneas. Okay, so they give you the parameters of their lenses there, and it's a wide range of base curves, a wide range of powers, and you can do toric lenses. Okay, so now let's move on to another lens that was developed by Bosch and Lomb in England, and it's called the Karasoff lens. And the Karasoff lens is a similar idea, but different. In other words, it's an aspheric surface on this lens. It's not quite as thick as most of the other keratoconus lenses out there, such as the NovaCone or the Concise K-Cone that we have. And it's basically looks like almost a piggyback fit. If you look at the central part of this lens, it looks like a lens within a lens. So you can see where the optical zone and the thickness is, and then they make it extremely thin so that it's a very comfortable lens to wear. However, you want this lens to move, unlike the super thick lenses that you're not asking them to move all that much. You want this lens to move like a gas perm lens. It's fit on and with a looser fitting philosophy. Okay, and an ideal fit in this lens is going to look like this. You can see it move, and then you watch the arrow. It's going to show you where the prism is, and it's going to show you where the center part of the prism is, which should be at 6 o'clock, which is approaching 6 o'clock, maybe 8 or 10 degrees off of 6 o'clock there, but that's very acceptable. Okay, as you can see, and I'll do that again. I'll show it to you again. It goes rather quickly, but look how much it moves. Look how much it moves, and then you have to analyze where that mark is, because almost all of them are going to be made toric. Because they're not thicker, you're going to have some leftover cylinder, so you're going to want to make it toric. So you need to know where that axis aligns with that mark, okay? And you don't want that mark to be off more than 15 degrees. If it's off more than 15 degrees, you need to go to a different lens in the set. There's a fitting set. And if you can't find a lens that is 15 degrees or less off center on that mark, then they're not a candidate for Kerasoft. But now we also can make thick and thin zones. Not thick and thin zones. You can also make it steep and flat. I'm back on the other design. You also can make it steep and flat where you need it to be steep and flat. So you've got an A1 to A2 area, you got an A3 to A4 area, and you can decide where you're going to make that steep and where you're going to make that flat. Okay, and that way, if that eye is steep just in one area, you can make it steep just in one area. If it's flat just in one area, you can make it flat in one area. If it's steep in two areas, make it steep in two areas, you know. Pretty nice. Okay, here's a case where you might need to apply that. This is called fluting or lifting off in just one particular place. So maybe you just want to steepen the lens up over there in that one quadrant, in that one specific area. It's called sector management, okay? And watch in video, you can see when they blink, you get the tear behind it, but then the lens lifts off and the tear dissipates from behind the lens. I'll show it to you here a couple of times. And over here is where we're talking about on the right side of the picture, okay? So you can fix that with, you know, with a little bit of steepness over there, you can fix that. Otherwise, the fit looks pretty good. It's pretty well centered. If that mark's close to 6 o'clock, you're just about done. So all you would need to do is just steepen that area up and steepen that lens up in one area. Okay, here we have a lens that's not moving enough. It's not moving like the first one I showed you. So this lens is too steep. Now in a regular soft lens fit, and look, it's at 6 o'clock, you think everything's great, you're going to order this lens, and as the day goes on, it's going to tighten up more and more as it dehydrates. So it's not going to work. You need that lens to move as much as a gas permeable lens does. You need it to move quite a bit. Okay? But you're close to a fit. You probably just need the next flatter base curve on the eye. You've got a mark that's pretty close to 6 o'clock there, so that part of it looks pretty good. Okay? Now, these are too flat, and you'll not only see that it decenters left and right on the optic zone, you'll watch it move left and right. As the patient gazes left and right, it doesn't stay positioned very well. Okay? Not so much when they look up. That didn't look too bad. Now the mark's way off. The mark's clear over here. Okay, I'll show you that again. The mark is clear over here when they gaze up. If you look real closely, you'll see that mark. Okay? And it's probably 30 degrees off axis over here. See that mark right there? Right there it is. Each clock face is 30 degrees, so I would say that that's 30 degrees off. And here we've got the same thing on the other eye. Both of them are loose. You need a tighter fitting lens. You may need tighter peripheral curves, and you can see that that one's 30 degrees off axis too. Okay? It's at the next clock face. It's not at 6 o'clock anymore. Okay. So now we move into corneal GP lens fitting, but summarize the Kerasoft. So this lens is a 14.5 to 15 millimeter lens, depending on what you want, and it has several base curve selections, and you also have toric on almost every patient. Rarely are you gonna fit a spherical lens. It happens. It happens. The tear factor does fill in behind there. There is a tear flow behind there. So for some people who don't have very irregular corneas, who just slightly irregular, can end up with a sphere. Okay. So then we move into corneal GP fittings. There's traditional versus new designs, and we'll talk about both. We'll talk about both. Okay. I talk a lot about reverse geometry lenses because I use a lot of reverse geometry lenses when I consult. And reverse geometry, all that means is that the secondary curve, the way traditional fits are made, is that the steepest curve in the lens is the base curve, which is the base curve is on the back surface of a gas perm lens. And then the next curve in the lens is flatter, and then you get flatter and flatter as you go out to the cornea. It flattens more and more. And what this is just reverse of that. Your steepest curve is your second curve in the lens rather than your first curve or the base curve in the lens. So we discovered that eyes that have been reshaped for orthokeratology, for LASIK and post-surgical situations, that we needed a reverse curve to match up with the geometry of the eye. Then we discovered that, you could do, you need orthokeratology. You're going to flatten the center of the eye temporarily. And by temporarily, I mean if you sleep in it every night, it's something that lasts throughout the day. But once you take the lenses off and quit wearing them, then it goes back to its normal shape, the cornea does. But we discovered that we could center the lens up and not have Z-axis tilt on normal corneas if we did some reverse geometry, and it didn't seem to do any harm to the cornea. It seemed to be just fine. So then we come along and we say, well, why can't we do that on irregular corneas? And we can. That was kind of the third move, where we actually put a reverse curve on lenses for fitting irregular corneas so we could keep them well centered and working well. Here's a traditional fit over here on the right. And this is what we always used to talk about, a little bit of an upper lid attachment. You want the lid to hold it in position. That makes it more comfortable. Also, you want to see at 3 and 9 o'clock on a with the rule astigmatic patient, that is with the rule meaning that it's flatter horizontally, you're going to see what we would call touch areas, which is really not truly touch. It's just approaching the cornea with less than 20 microns of tear here probably. And that's going to hold the lens in position nicely. You get a nice uniform edge lift on the lens so that there's good tear exchange, and this lens moves up and down, and that would be a wonderful fit on a nice with the rule astigmat. Now, so we talked about touch, and we talked about touch points maybe even being a slight touch centrally here for better vision. If you approach the cornea a little more, you get a little better vision sometimes. So the two fitting points were across the 180 at 3 and 9 o'clock, and more of a little flatter lens in the center. But if you look here, and you can see where the keratoconus is, where this little dark area is, this is a keratoconic patient, and you can see that it's centrally vaulted. It's not, we're not looking for a lot of pupil to show here, okay? Same idea as that scleral lens, except that in the mid-periphery of the lens where that reverse curve is, you're going to see a dark band right here in the mid-periphery, okay? And then you get a nice edge lift for tear exchange. And that would be a reverse curve lens, reverse geometry lens, and it's more of a target or a bullseye pattern. Okay, so on these irregular corneas, you've got to do something to keep that lens centered, because it's going to want to follow the steepest area of the eye, wherever it is, and most of the time it's decentered. It's decentered inferiorly. So how are you going to make that happen? How are you going to keep that lens in position? Okay, and so you've got this irregular cornea that's an inferior cone, and you can see them up here in the corners of the pictures up in the corners. And what about an optical zone size? You know, are you going to make it an 8 millimeter optic zones? Look at the difference between steep and flat here in that 8 millimeter picture we're looking at there. So probably you're going to want to keep your optical zones as small as you can possibly live with to keep problems from occurring. You're going to get less of the unwanted touch and less of the unwanted flatness if you keep the optic zones and regulate them on a smaller size rather than a larger size. Lens diameter doesn't have to dictate your optical zone size. You can put an 11 millimeter lens on the eye and give it a 6.5 millimeter zone. You can put an 8.7 millimeter lens on the eye and give it a 6.5 millimeter zone. Same optic zone size. There is no reason why an 11 millimeter lens has to have a 9 millimeter optic zone. It can have a much smaller optic zone, and many times that works out better. More chances of things to go wrong in keratoconus fits if you go to a large optic zone, because there's so much difference in steepness and flatness in that 8-9 millimeter range. Okay, so I think that from what I've seen clinically and over the years, and both in consulting over the years, that most of the flare and glare and ghosting that we get complaints about are caused by a couple of things. Number one is Z-axis tilt, where the lens is actually tilted on the cornea and decentered, so you even get out of the optic zone. The other thing is maybe you get a little bit of surface buildup on the lens, so you get some, some halos or ghosting from that. But mostly it's due to optic zone size. It's not due to optic zone size. Optic zone size, we used to fit PMMA days, we used to fit little bitty lenses on the eye and fit them steep centrally and didn't have hardly any complaints about flare, glare, and ghosting. We get the complaints about flare, glare, and ghosting in these irregular corneas because we have a decentered lens or a tilted lens or something's going on with uneven tear behind that lens, okay? So keep your optic zone small. In LASIK, by the way, the standard in LASIK for optic zone sizes on treatment is 6 millimeters. 6 millimeters. And you don't get a lot of complaints about glare and ghosting and halos after that eye is healed. You get very few complaints about that. So I'm not convinced that optic zone size need to be bigger to resolve that, okay? In fairly steep cones, what are you going to do? This eye over here on the left, how are you going to fix that? You know, you got this real steep area, you got this real flat area. How are you going to make a corneal lens fit? Okay, this is not, be careful when you're looking at your topography, this is not beginning keratoconus. This is just a high writing lens. It's very upper lid attached. The lid pushes that into the sclera up under the upper lid, and then it tips away from the eye inferiorly, and the epithelium heaps up inferiorly. If you take that patient out of that lens for 4 to 6 weeks, you'll see all of that go away. However, one of the hardest things to resolve is to keep that lens, the new lens, from going up there and upper lid attaching again, because into the sclera is a more permanent pocket or a valley that has formed, and that lens is going to want to migrate there. It's going to want to go to the valley. It's going to go to the pocket, and let that upper lid put it in exactly the same position. So all these patients that have had extreme upper lid attached lenses for years are a nightmare when you're fitting multifocal lenses, but that's a whole nother subject in multifocal fitting, okay? So reverse curve lenses, second curve steeper than the base curve. It's a stabilizing factor. It's like the hat band on the hat that you can tighten down or loosen up however you need it. Centration is key to keeping the lens fit, reduces the possibility of unwanted astigmatism and aberrations, allows for larger diameters to be fit because of better lens positioning. Used to, if we, fit them too big and kept that optic zone big, they go out of position on us. And then what do? Oh my gosh. Makes the lens a little easier to fit in a larger diameter lens, okay? So as you can see, this is a fairly large lens on the cornea, probably 10 millimeters or so. This is probably more like a 9.5 millimeter lens in a traditional fit. So it allows us to make these lenses bigger and keep them well centered. And interpalpebral is what you're looking for in reverse geometry designs, okay? So in fairly steep cones, if you place a traditional lens on there, it's probably going to decenter inferiorly on you, just like you can see where it's steep here and where the lens wants to follow here on this eye. And you're going to see, look at the uneven amount of tear back there. You've got a tremendous amount, and it's down onto the limbus, actually, inferiorly. And so it's going to become very uncomfortable, and it's going to encroach on the limbus. Okay? Here, we went bigger and we did a little bit of reverse geometry, but we didn't fix the problem because we got the same decentration. That lens is almost tucked under the lower lid and away from the upper lid. It's tilted forward on the cornea, and you got these dark areas. So you need to do something to resolve it. So you've got to get the fit right. You've just got to get the fit right. Center of the lens using a secondary curve steeper than the base curve. Vault it. Remember, we talked about in scleral lens, if you vaulted the problem, you could still see even with a significant amount of tear behind it. So here you vaulted it centrally, okay, and you still can see. You don't have to approach the cornea centrally and make them see, as long as it's not tilted, as long as that lens is straight up and down on the cornea. The second curve locks the lens into position, and it's flat enough to get tear exchange. You don't want to make it so steep that it seals off the tear, okay? And multiple curves in the periphery work best, or an aspheric peripheral curve system works best, so that you have plenty of tear exchange. And the scleral lenses, actually, in this situation, would maybe even be easier, that you don't have to fit the cornea, that you're just going to vault it all, and it will center up for you nicely if you get it fit properly, okay? Again, larger diameter lenses work better for pellucid marginal degeneration with that inferiorly steep area and that superiorly flat area. Keep the OZ small, okay? Large diameter lenses with reverse geometry are a good choice. Scleral lenses for pellucid marginal degeneration are an excellent choice also, okay? How about piggyback fitting? We're going to cover some of that. How about that? How about that? I thought that subject was dead. I thought hardly anybody did piggyback fitting anymore. Work well on PD reverse lenses. We've covered all that. I'm not going to go over it. But small optic zones, a secret. Don't go too big. Here's what a reverse geometry lens should look like when you first put it on. This is out of the fitting set. You see the central vault. You see the dark ring, the ring of darkness in the mid periphery. Now you may have a little too much edge lift here. It looks like it's lifting off a little too much. You may want to reduce a little bit of that edge lift. That's going to make it uncomfortable for the patient and probably make it move a little more than you want it to. Okay, so this was you can see a patient that has this real steep area. This may be pellucid. This may be, you could argue that this is a cone or pellucid. Either one, it doesn't really matter which one it is. What you've got is a real steep area and a real flat area. So you put this lens on out of the fitting set, and your first impression is it's a great fit. I took this with an old camera years ago. This is probably 8 or 9 or 10-year-old picture that I took through a slit lamp with a digital camera that didn't have a lot of megapixels, so it's not a high quality picture. But as you can see, I thought, wow, we've got a really good fit here because you got your central vault, you got your, mid peripheral darkness, you got a good edge lift. So wow, I don't think we'll have to do much but over refract this one. Then I gave it 10 minutes to settle on the eye, and it didn't look quite as good. At 3 and 9 o'clock, I lost my edge lift. I didn't have any edge lift to speak of. And at 6 and 12 o'clock, I've got too much edge lift. You can see I got edge lift here and I got edge lift down here. So really all I needed to do was build some toric peripheral curves on to make it, and I'll show this again, make it flatter in the 3 and 9 and steeper at the 12 and 6. So that's what I did. I actually built some toric peripheral curves on this lens. And after 10 hours of wear, after I built the toric peripheral curves on the lens, this is what it looked like. Much, much better. And you'll see me playing with the Ratten filter here. You'll also see that this patient has some very thick eyelashes. And this is a male patient, by the way, not using any form of mascara. And you see a lot of lashes there. But what you're looking at here is you can see that you got a nice amount of edge lift now at 3 and 9 o'clock. You may have a little more at 6 o'clock, but that's not bad. That's pretty good. Okay. So, central cones. Central cones don't require as much fitting knowledge because, remember, traditional lens fits are steepest in the center and they get flatter to the periphery in all traditional designs. So a traditional design on something that looked like a central keratoconus, like these two do, would be perfectly fine. There's no reason to go to extremely large diameter lenses. There's no reason to go to anything but a traditional keratoconus fit. Some people would call it a nipple cone, meaning that it's the steepest right in the center of the over the optical axis. Okay, and a nipple cone fit would look something like this in a good traditional fit. You'd have feather touch, what we call centrally here. You'd have maybe a little band of touch here, and that's what's holding the lens in position. But look at the nice uniform edge lift and tear exchange. That would be a good fit. By the way, Ed Bennett gave me that picture. Okay, this is a traditional cone fit on a traditional on a nipple cone, and that's what it looks like. You can keep your OZ small because that steep area is small. I'll go back and show you that a flat peripheral curve system, and it has limited touch centrally, and that's good. Okay, so I'm going to go back to showing you those. As you can see, that is a centrally steep eye, and that's what the fit looks like, and that's why we keep that OZ only at about 7 millimeters or less, because look, that steep area is in 7 millimeter or less area. Okay, that's why we do that. Okay, so you can send your topographies the low-tech way with your cell phone. You don't have to use high-tech. If you want someone to design a lens for you, you can see, and I put this picture in there showing the fingers so that you can see that this staff member was holding the lens. You can even see the files in the background here. You got patient files in the background, and just send it electronically, and the lens can be designed by a consultant on the other end just by looking at the topography and talking to you about it. Okay, so you put this lens on, you take a picture with a cell phone, you send it to another fitter or you send it to your consultant and he looks at it. This is the electronic portion that I said I was going to get to, and this is to me the most interesting part. And you can see this is not a good fit. You've lost your fluorescein here. You've got too much fluorescein down here. That lens is tilted. It's riding low. It's tilted on the cornea. You lost your fluorescein up above because it's tilted away from the eye up above and tilted into the eye down below. And that's why you have all that pooling fluorescein down below. Okay. Over here, you can see where that keratoconus is. You see where it resides. And you see that you've got a touch area here. And this lens is also riding low. You can see the iris is not very well covered. It's not very well centered. And it's riding low and it's tilted on the cornea also. Okay. So you can put a soft lens behind it, however, to try to make that lens center up better. And also make it more comfortable for the patient, not only position better, to make it more comfortable for the patient. The thicker lens that you go, and I always suggest if you're going to try one on out of a 6-pack lens, and get you a diagnostic lens that's like a +5. Okay, if you have it high modulus, stiffer, so that it doesn't conform to the corneal shape. If it's thicker, it also doesn't conform to the corneal shape as much, and you can put a rigid lens on top of that thicker lens, and it'll want to position at the thickest most part of the lens. High decay, you've got plenty of oxygen to deal with both in your gas perm and your soft lens. You can decide how much oxygen you want there, but 100 decay on that soft lens is a good idea. Okay, and you can have custom-made soft lenses if you can't find anything that fits in those traditional 6-pack lenses. They'll custom make you a lens in silicone hydrogel material. Okay, so you've got this lens that we talked about that's tilted on this cornea. So then you place a soft lens on behind it, and look what happens. Much better positioning, much better fluorescein pattern. You know, you're getting, and all you did was take that same lens and place a soft lens behind it in that +5 power and high modulus. Wow, wow, that's pretty neat. And you can look in your Tyler's quarterly and discover which is high modulus and which is not. Now I'm showing you these more for comfort reasons. It improved the fit slightly by putting a soft lens behind it, but it improved the comfort dramatically. Look at this eye that doesn't have a soft lens behind it. Look how he squints up. Look how he opens his eye here. I'll just run these two for you and show you these two. The other two do the same thing, but I'll show you these two. If you look at this, the lens is riding a little bit low, but it does pick up with the blink. Okay, not too bad a fit. It has lost a little fluorescein out by the edge in the nasal area, but that's because it's decentered a little bit. It's decentered nasally, so it loses its fluorescein there. But it stays centered fairly well. It is a little decentered inferiorly. Okay. Now look what happens, and I'm going to go back. Look how his eye is all squinted up. He doesn't want to open his eye. It doesn't feel good. He doesn't like it. Okay. Now let's go down here and show you what happens when you put a soft lens behind it. Watch the eye. It opens much wider. Look at that nice tear exchange behind the lens. It's even better. It does position a little better. Okay. Now, do we need to adjust that rigid lens a little bit? Sure. But it is a better fit already. It is a little better centered already. And look at that even tear behind there as compared to the other. And now we even have fluorescein at the edge in the nasal area. And if you look at it, when he blinks, you'll see the fluorescein pick up in the nasal area even. Okay. And watch when he blinks. See that fluorescein over there? Oh, yeah, good flow. We didn't have that without that soft lens behind it. And that rigid lens is moving independently of the soft lens, and that's very important, which we'll get to here in some other parts of the presentation, which is right now. So here we have a lens that's too flat, and you're going to see the fluorescein. Watch inferiorly here. Watch this fluorescein dissipate altogether, because this thing is lifting off the eye so much inferiorly that all the fluorescein, all the tear goes out from behind it. Watch it. Watch it. Ooh, there it went. There it went. Wow. Wow. And bubbles form at the edge. And if you give it too flat, you'll even get bubbles to come into the center. It'll suck a bubble from the edge into the center. And you can see that you got a dark area here centrally. That lens is fit too flat. Okay? So you decided that you would put some toric peripheral curves on this. Not only did you help the central part of the fit by going a little steeper, but you put some toric peripheral curves on here to even out the fluorescein at the edge. And you can see this is much, you got rid of all that inferior edge lift. It still is moving independently of the rigid lens, which you want it to do, because then you get tear exchange behind the lens. You can see the reverse geometry, see where it's centrally vaulted, see where it's darker in the mid-periphery. Now, we don't have a Rattan filter here, or I think you would see more at the edge on the edge lift if we were using a Rattan filter. This one was taken, you know, with a camera that's hooked to the slit lamp. This one down here is taken with a camera that's not hooked to the slit lamp. That's not going to play for me. Huh. My lower ones aren't going to play for me, so I apologize. This one's too steep and doesn't move. This one moves just like this one up here and is a much nicer fit, closer to what you're seeing up here. Okay? So, yeah, I can't believe it didn't play, but it didn't. Okay, I'll have to fix that next time around. So here's your ideal fit. Here's what you're looking for in a piggyback fit, and you can see the independent movement behind this soft lens is behind it, and it really helps that reverse geometry lens center up better and do nicer. And these are all irregular corneas. Every one of them are irregular corneas. So maybe I can get it to play here. This is a lens that you'd say, oh, that's too steep. Look, you've lost all your fluorescein. You got all this central pooling of fluorescein here. You got an air bevel that's trapped, and it's too steep. Well, what's actually happened is it's tilted on the cornea, because a still picture will fool you. Look what happens in the video when you watch the video. You're going to see that this bubble moves around. Number one, it's not stuck in one place. There's the soft lens behind it. You saw the edge of the soft lens there for just a second. I'll run this a couple of times. And you can see that when you're looking here, you look at the fluorescein fill in behind there. So it's not too steep. It's actually tilted on the cornea. It's tilted forward when it goes in this one position, and it traps a bubble from the edge. The edge has got too much edge lift, and it brings a bubble in, and it traps up underneath there. And finally, sometimes without the piggyback, which we have over here, is you will have that lens that tilts forward. Basically, is you're going to end up with a lens that quits moving as the day goes on. It'll just be stuck in that position. And let's see if we can see this bubble. It's not going to play for us. I'll have to work on that. Okay. Sclera lenses fit with email pictures. You can do that. You can send me email pictures. This is an OCT. This is shows the exact, this is the cornea. Can you believe that? And this is how much it's vaulting away from the cornea, which is some 380 microns centrally. So it's showing you where he put the cursor, about 383 microns. If you go to the dead center of the cornea, which would be more a little bit over here because this is probably an off-central picture, it should be around 330 microns, just like it says it is here on the left eye. So you can see exactly how much this lens is vaulting away from the cornea at any place with this instrument, with this OCT instrument. Okay, and this OCT instrument also can show you where the lens lands, where it lands onto the sclera. Okay, and here is a right lens, a right eye, and they're gazing nasally, gazing in towards their nose in that right eye. And this is where the lens is landing out in that periphery. This is what we're looking at right here, this little edge right here. And you can see where it's landing, and you can see that you don't have much edge lift, that you've lost your edge lift out there, that it's really pushing into the conjunctiva pretty heavily right there. And when you look at it, the same eye, you can see it's starting to seal off in that same position, that it's showing no edge lift, that's not allowing the blood vessels to come through. And we talked about that earlier, and that's a very important feature. So now you can see what's going on both with the instrument and with the slit lamp. Okay, you can compare, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on with that OCT. Over here, this is a superior gaze on this eye, on this right eye, and on the left eye, we're going to look at it over here, and we're going to see that with that superior gaze, you can see that you have decent edge lift, that there's space in between here, and the edge is lifting off, and you've got space that's not sealed off there out in the sclera. And look, sure enough, the blood vessels are unencumbered as they gaze upward, and it looks great. These are all pictures that have been emailed to me, and you can decide where you want to make it steep and where you want to make it flat. Probably here we're going to want toric peripheral curves, or at least a quadrant specific where we make it flatter in some particular area. Okay. Now, another test you can run is you can put the lens on before you put any fluorescein in, and then put some fluorescein in. If you see it bleed in excessively and bubbles start to form, you know that one area is really flat and really lifting off the eye, and it's causing this tear to come in from the edge. And rather than putting fluorescein behind the lens when you think that's happening, you put the lens on without fluorescein, instill the fluorescein in the eye, and watch and see where that tear flows. And it causes bubbles eventually, and you can almost see a bubble there. You can see a few here, but you can really see them here and here, and those are all from too much edge lift. Okay. What about piggyback fitting? Is it a dead modality? I don't think so, and we're going to talk about that. Here's one case where we did a piggyback fit on one eye only. We had a grafted eye here. In this situation, we had a keratoconus eye that had not had a surgery. Here we had surgery to correct a keratoconus in the same patient that had gone, quite a bit, had advanced a lot. So we needed to have a graft in order for the patient to see, because it was a very bulging cone. And so here we just did some reverse geometry to do that central vault, and everything looked great just on a centrally steep cone. We did not do a piggyback fit. Okay. That's the final fit on the reverse curve lens that we did. Here is also reverse geometry. You got to see it's subtle. You don't see as much because the fluorescein gets trapped by the soft lens. And here's the edge of the soft lens down here. And you can see that this lens is well centered. This lens does move independently when you see it in video, which we don't have a video of it right now. But you can see that this lens is really a great fit on a very, very irregular cornea. Look how flat that is in that one spot. Look how steep that is out here in the periphery of the cornea. And you can see that we have a nice uniform fit, which I don't think you could possibly get in a corneal contact lens. You'd have to go to a scleral lens to make this lens fit, or a piggyback. Okay. So you've got high decay materials for piggyback fitting. You've got high modulus. They're stiffer, so they don't conform to the corneal shape as much. You can use custom soft lenses when you can't find something in a 6-pack that fits in a soft lens, because some of them are so irregular that a soft lens won't even fit it no matter what you select out of that 6-pack. You've got to design it to fit that eye. And the center thickness needs to be increased in high plus powers, or in custom lenses you can do a plano with a center thickness that's as thick as a +5. It can be plano power with a +5. And oh, by the way, the power in the soft lens is negated by putting a rigid lens on top of it. It goes away. So even a +5 doesn't change the power need in the rigid lens and make it have an extra -5. Usually one diopter change is about all you get. Usually about a diopter minus is average that you have to add to the gas perm lens to offset that +5 power that's on the eye. And there's many theories as to why that happens, but I'm just going to tell you that it happens. That when you put a rigid lens on top of a soft lens, it pretty well negates the power of the soft lens. It also has a bandage effect. It protects that cornea, and it's thin in places where it's really steep, so you want to protect that cornea as much as possible so you don't scar the cornea where it's thin. So this protects it, gives it a bandage effect. It has that effect also. So what soft lens you want to select? You want to select something with a decent oxygen permeability. You want it to be high modulus, stiffer. You want it to be thicker, maybe a +5. And if fluting occurs, then you may have to do a custom soft lens. You may have to do fluting, as we showed you earlier, is where that lens lifts off at the edge, where the eye is steep. And if it does that, you may have to go to a custom soft lens. Let's tell you what happened here in this situation. If you look at the top topography, this person came in wearing a gas permeable lens on a grafted eye, and they had, when they couldn't see out of their glasses. They had so much irregularity that they overwore the contacts because they really couldn't see out of their glasses when they took the lenses off. So after 6 weeks of wearing a piggyback fit, putting a soft lens on with a rigid lens, look what happens over the optical axis. It becomes more uniform. It's more that blue and green area. We took away 6 diopters of cylinder, and the patient could see in a pair of glasses. Now, they were only 20/30 or 20/40 in a pair of glasses. Up here, they were like 2100, 2200. Here, they were 20/30 or 20/40, which is very functional vision. So in the evenings, they didn't have to overwear their contacts. They could take their contacts out and put their glasses on and see to be quite functional. So it does have that effect too. It protects the eye, and it can help take the eye back to a more normal shape. Intacs, in some cases, will only just take this, and Intacs is a ring that's been surgically implanted onto the cornea, okay? And Intacs is designed supposedly to create a nice uniform area over the optical axis, which in this case it didn't happen. And you can see it's up over 70 diopters steep inferiorly and down to 32.5 or 30.2 actually flatter in the superior quadrant. So we've got a 40 diopter difference in steepness and flatness, and that's a nightmare to fit in a corneal contact lens. Let me tell you, it's going to take a piggyback and probably a scleral lens. You're probably going to fit this with a scleral lens, okay? So you take out of your fitting set, and this is my one and only success with a GP lens on an Intacs patient, and without having to put a soft lens behind it or without having to go to a scleral lens. But I think that patient has since gone to scleral lenses because they are even more comfortable in the scleral lenses than this lens. But anyway, tried this one on right out of the fitting set, got sent a picture that looked like this, and we said, okay, here's what we need to do. A little steeper here, a little flatter there. We'll change the fit here. We'll change the fit there. And voila, we ended up with this kind of a fit. Not bad. And the patient wore that for a couple of years, very successfully. But when scleral lenses became more popular and came along and were easier to fit, the patient tried the scleral lenses and was even more satisfied with the scleral lens fit. Okay. So I asked one of my accounts to take a picture of this cornea without a soft lens on. This is without the +5 soft lens on, and this is a corneal graft, and you can see it's very, very irregular. If you look at that axial map up there, there's some really hot spots and some very cool spots here on steep and flat. And if you look at the numbers, you got 37 here, you got 45 over here. It's really really different. Okay. So then I said, take a picture putting that +5 soft lens on there, and you can see what happens here is that any gas perm lens that you put on this eye is going to want to center up over this hot spot, over the red spot, and look where it is. It's pretty well centered over the eye. So that's why the piggyback fit works well. And if you want to know with a plus, just subtract the +5 from these numbers over here, and that's how steep or how flat it is in that particular area. Kind of interesting, isn't it? So that's why piggyback fits. That's one of the reasons they work. They want to center over the thicker part of the lens. Okay. So without piggyback and with piggyback side by side, just so you can see it, you can see what happened. And over here we have a picture of a lens, an eye that gets up to 76 diopters steep. How are you going to fit that? It better be with a scleral lens, or it better be with a soft piggyback fit, because you're not going to make a corneal lens fit with a 76 diopter steepness. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to fit no matter how you design that lens. Okay. So give you an actual factual case history here of someone that was fit with piggyback fitting. Okay. This lens was 84 diopters steep at its steepest point. Okay. Was averaging, and that blue area looks flat, but the blue is still in the 50s. So it's not a flat eye. It is a very steep eye, and it's steep way out. So you're still in 50 diopter range in the blue areas that you're looking at here on this map over here. I'll point it out to you. And it gets up to as steep as 84, which is right here in this, just to the other side of the pupil. It gets up to 84 diopter steep. And you're not going to fit that in a traditional any kind of even a reverse geometry by itself gas perm lens. You're not going to be able to make it 84 diopter steep. You're not even going to make it 70 diopter steep. When you get past about 60 diopters, it starts to become a real struggle to make a corneal GP lens fit. You're going to have a real tough time of making that work. So We couldn't find a soft lens that would fit this cornea, believe it or not. So we went to a custom soft lens made of silicone hydrogel material in the definitive material. And we made it out of, we made it a 15 millimeter lens with an 8.3 base curve. And we went larger than normal to get way out on the cornea where it's flatter. I mean, out on the sclera where it's flatter, so that we could fit it more of a scleral fit than a corneal fit. We made it thicker, and we did 3 times steeper, 3 steps steeper on the peripheral curves, because you saw how steep that eye was. So we needed a steep lens that would fit. And something I didn't say is that we made it about a 0.25 center thickness, about the same as you would in a high plus power. Okay, and this is what it looked like on that eye. That was over 80 diopters deep. Not bad. You have one little teeny tiny trap bubble, but you got a soft lens behind it to protect it, so it's not going to desiccate the cornea. It's fairly well centered, and you can see the reverse curve is showing up here. So with high molecular fluorescein that we put in there, you can see the fit. Okay, which modality should we choose for the patient? We've got a lot of choices. You know, and electronically we can send these to other fitters, and we can send these to consultants, and we can all, you know, it's like just as I'm closing out here, I'd like to say that it's like they do in hospital situations. A lot of times they'll have a group of orthopedic surgeons, they'll have a group of heart surgeons that are going to make some radical changes to a patient's body and do some surgery. And what they'll do is they'll discuss it all and actually come up with a method for doing it as a group. So there's nothing wrong with sharing this information with someone else who has run into these situations, and discussing it and figuring out between the 2 or the 3 or the 4 of you exactly what you're going to do to fit this patient. So a nice part about electronics is you can send it to other places. Okay, so traditional small lenses, they're corneal. Okay, traditional large diameter lenses that are still corneal, but out to that 10, 11, almost 12 millimeter size. Reverse geometry corneal lenses, are you going to put some reverse geometry in there? Are you going to use a piggyback modality, that old dead modality that nobody uses anymore that I consult on every day? Irregular corneal specialty soft lenses, are you going to use some of them for some of your patients? Yeah, you probably will. You probably will. There's some patients that are going to want to have soft lenses, and you're going to want to fit them in soft lenses. Okay. Scleral lenses, absolutely. Another great tool in the toolbox. You're going to use that. Which one you're going to pick after you've discussed it with people electronically and thought about it and everything, you'll select a lens, and you'll be closer to right the first time by sharing this information. I want to thank you, and good luck in fitting all your difficult fits. And I want to thank the National Academy of Opticianry for allowing me to share this with you. And now we're going to end this show.